There is a kind of wound that doesn't bleed. It doesn't show on the body. It doesn't earn sympathy or flowers or neighbors bringing food. It lives in the chest, quiet and permanent, the kind that a mother can deliver with 7 words without even knowing she has thrown them. Akosua Mensah was standing 2 feet away when her mother looked directly at her face at her twin sister's funeral and said, "If God wanted any of my daughters, he wouldn't have chosen you." Not to the sky, not in prayer, to her face, directly, in front of everyone. The neighbors went silent. The women in black cloth stopped moving. Even the compound itself seemed to hold its breath, as if the walls needed a moment to process what a mother had just said to a daughter who had already lost everything. Akosua did not flinch. She did not cry. She did not drop the cup of water she was holding. She set it down carefully on the nearest flat surface, turned, walked. And the question the whole compound was asking, the question that hung in the air long after she disappeared through that doorway, was not what did she do. It was, who died? And why would a mother say that to the daughter who survived? If you have ever been the one who was left behind, if you have ever loved someone so completely that their dream felt like yours even when the door closed in your face, if you have ever performed strength for a room full of people while something inside you was quietly coming apart, if you love stories about identity and sacrifice, about sisters and secrets, about a woman who had to become someone else before she could finally become herself, if you love slow burn tension, a truth buried 20 years deep, a man who falls in love with a woman he thinks he already knows, and the moment he realizes he never knew her at all, then this story is for you. To understand that, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to Accra. In a busy, color-soaked neighborhood on the west side of the city, there was a compound that always smelled like groundnut soup and fresh-cut fabric. This was the Mensah home. The walls were painted a yellow that had started bright and faded into something warmer, the color of old sunlight, of a place that had been loved for a long time. Mame Akua Mensah was a seamstress, one of the best in the district. Her fingers moved across cloth the way a pianist moves across keys, with muscle memory, with love, with the quiet authority of someone who had spent 40 years perfecting their craft. She was not a rich woman, but she was a proud woman, and she had raised her daughters to understand the difference. Those daughters were Abena and Akosua. Born 3 minutes apart on a Tuesday morning in September, they arrived into the world identical in every visible way. The same round face, the same deep brown eyes that caught light like polished wood, the same small dimple on the left cheek that Mommy said came from their father, a man who had left before either of them learned to walk. But identical faces do not mean identical souls. Abena was order. From the time she could hold a pencil, her schoolbooks were immaculate. Color-coded tabs, underlined passages, handwritten summaries in the margins. She made lists for her lists. Her teacher once told Mommy that Abena was the kind of student who made other students want to be better, not through competition, but through example. She was disciplined in the quiet way that looks effortless from the outside, but is actually the result of hundreds of private choices nobody else ever sees. Akosua was fire. Akosua had a photographic memory, the kind that scientists study and parents brag about. She could read a passage once and recite it 3 weeks later without missing a comma. She absorbed information the way dry earth absorbs rain, instantly, completely, without resistance. Her teachers were frequently stunned. Her classmates were frequently annoyed. But Akosua had a shadow, the moment something became truly difficult. The kind of difficult that requires sitting with discomfort and pushing through it anyway. Akosua found reasons to step away. A subject would become hard and she would decide it wasn't for her. An opportunity would present resistance, and she would interpret that resistance as a sign. She was not lazy. She was afraid. Afraid of trying fully and still failing, because failing at something you have tried is survivable. But failing at something you gave everything to, that is a different kind of wound entirely. The one thing Akosua never stepped away from was Abena. If anyone in school looked at her twin the wrong way, Akosua was already moving. She had a voice that could fill a room and a presence that made people recalculate. Abena was her one exception, the one thing she never quit, never ran from, never allowed anyone to diminish. They were, in every way that mattered, one person split across two bodies. When they were 14 years old, they sat together on a cracked plastic chair in front of their mother's old television and watched a documentary. A Ghanaian woman in a white coat stood in a corridor in Seoul, South Korea, and spoke about what it meant to carry your culture into spaces that had never made room for it. She spoke about bodies, about the science of how people die, and the justice of making sure the truth is told even when the powerful want it buried. She spoke about forensic medicine the way Mommy spoke about fabric, like it was a calling, not a career. Abena grabbed Akosua's hand. Akosua grabbed back. Neither of them said anything. They didn't have to. The dream was decided in that silence, the way the most important decisions always are. They spent 6 years preparing for it together. 6 years of shared textbooks and late nights and whispered encouragement through the dark. 6 years of Mommy saving coins in a tin by the sewing machine, telling them that education was the one inheritance she could give them that nobody could ever take back. They both applied to Yonsei University School of Medicine in Seoul. They both wrote their personal statements at the same kitchen table, elbows nearly touching, reading sentences aloud to each other for feedback. They both waited. The letters arrived on the same morning. 2 separate envelopes, same university crest. Abena's contained an acceptance, full scholarship, accommodation, monthly stipend. Akosua's contained a rejection. There was no dramatic collapse, no screaming. Akosua read the letter twice, folded it carefully along its original crease, placed it in the kitchen drawer under a stack of old receipts, and walked to the yard to hang laundry. That was what made it devastating. The control. The practiced silence of someone who had already rehearsed this possibility in private and decided how they would perform composure when it arrived. Inside, something broke that never fully healed. Mommy's response was not malicious. It came from a mother's joy, the uncontainable spilling over pride of a woman who had sacrificed for 20 years and was finally watching it materialize. She threw a party. She called relatives. She pressed Abena's face between her palms and wept with happiness. Akosua stood in the middle of all of it and smiled so hard her jaw ached. And Abena, organized, perceptive, deeply attuned to her twin, pulled her aside that night and held her for a long time without saying anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. "I'm coming back for you," Abena whispered. "This isn't the end of your story. I promise you." Akosua nodded into her shoulder. She believed her. For a while. After Abena left, Akosua tried. Let the record show. She genuinely tried. Pre-med at a local university. 2 semesters. Then the grief of the empty chair beside her in every lecture hall became something she couldn't separate from the work itself. And she withdrew. A nursing program. She lasted through the coursework, made it to clinical rotations, and quit on a Tuesday morning when a hospital corridor smelled exactly like the future she was supposed to be living somewhere else. Content creation. Her photographic memory and natural magnetism built her 40,000 followers in 3 months. Then the algorithm shifted. A larger creator stole her concept. A comment section argument spiraled into something exhausting. The door became heavy. She put down the handle. Her last video was quiet. No music, no edits, just her face and the camera and 7 words. "I need a break. I'll be back soon." She never went back. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Abena was becoming extraordinary. She graduated top of her class at Yonsei. She joined the Seoul National Forensic Medicine Institute, one of the most respected forensic pathology institutions in East Asia, as a junior researcher and climbed faster than anyone in the building's history. She became the first African forensic pathologist ever appointed to the institute's senior staff. Her colleagues spoke about her in corridors in a particular tone, the tone reserved for people who have not just learned their profession, but embodied it. And somewhere between a late case filing and a conference presentation, she met Kang Minjun, the son of the institute's founding director. Not a doctor himself, a forensic accountant, quiet and precise, working on retainer for the institute's board. Watchful in the way that only certain people are. The kind of watchful that sees what is present beneath what is visible. He fell in love with Abena the way careful people fall in love, slowly, completely, and with absolute certainty. They kept it private. Not hidden exactly, just theirs. And every single day, without fail, Abena told him about her sister. Akosua would have destroyed that cross-examination. Akosua once memorized an entire textbook to win an argument with a teacher. You would love her, Minjun. She is the most fearless person I have ever known. Akosua existed in his mind entirely through Abena's words, a legend. A woman he had never stood in the same room with, only heard about every single day, for years. The one video call they shared lasted 11 minutes. He bowed at the camera. She laughed. Abena rolled her eyes fondly. And that was the closest Kang Minjun and Akosua Mensah had ever been, a screen apart. The wedding was small, a ceremony in Seoul. A restaurant in Mapo-gu with 12 guests and white gardenias on every table, because Abena had read somewhere that gardenias meant secret love, and she had thought that was exactly right. Mommy watched on a video call from the fabric shop in Accra, her good dress on, her reading glasses pushed up on her head, a handkerchief already in her hand before the ceremony even began. Akosua watched from the compound, sitting on the front step, her phone propped against a cup of water, her best dress on for a celebration she was attending through a 4-inch screen. Minjun stood at the front and said his vows in Korean and then, at the end, added 3 words in Twi that Abena had been teaching him for weeks. Mi do wo. I love you. His pronunciation was terrible. Mommy burst out laughing. Akosua laughed too, the kind of laugh that is also a cry, that lives in the exact space between joy and loss, between being so happy for someone and so quietly, privately, devastatingly aware of the distance between their life and yours. She watched her sister's face when Minjun said those words. She watched how Abena looked at him. And on the drive home from the compound that evening, alone in the backseat of a taxi, the city going dark outside the window, she let herself feel the full weight of the distance, just for that ride, just for those 20 minutes. Then she went inside, made Mommy's tea, set it on the table, and didn't say anything at all. That was the world before. 2 women, 1 face, completely different lives inside it, and neither of them knowing that in 4 months, everything, every choice, every sacrifice, every letter folded along its original crease, was about to become something neither of them had ever prepared for. Abena came home in November. She arrived at Kotoka International Airport with 3 suitcases, 1 for herself, 2 entirely for other people. Korean skincare for Mommy. Fabric from Dongdaemun Market in colors Mommy had mentioned once, months ago, in a video call Abena had been paying attention to, even while she was also reviewing case notes. Snacks Akosua had loved since childhood, the specific ones, not the general category. She came with the particular attentiveness of someone who had been away a long time and compensated for every missed moment by memorizing every preference, every offhand comment, Every small thing said in passing that most people forget. But Abena filed away like evidence. She came alone. Minjun stayed in Seoul. A case review he couldn't postpone. A board meeting he had been preparing for weeks. He kissed her at the departure gate and told her to eat properly and call him when she landed. She promised. She always kept her promises. The compound received her the way it always received her, with noise and color and Mommy's hands pressing her face between both palms as if checking that she was real, that she was whole, that the city that had taken her had not taken anything essential. The neighbors came. The food multiplied. Someone brought a speaker and the compound filled with music until the street outside started listening too. And through all of it, through every greeting and every story and every moment of pure, uncomplicated joy, Abena's eyes were scanning, always scanning, looking for Akosua underneath Akosua. She found her eventually the way she always did, not in the noise, but in the quiet. Late, past midnight, the compound finally still. The two of them on the front step the way they had sat 1,000 times before, shoulders touching, the city a low hum around them, the kind of comfortable silence that only exists between people who have known each other longer than they have known themselves. "You look tired," Abena said, quietly, the way she said the things that mattered. "You look like a doctor," Akosua replied, grinning. "I'm serious, Sua. So am I. Very official. Very soul." Abena put her arm around her twin's shoulders. "I came home because I needed to see you. Not Mama. Not the compound. You. I need you to know that I see you. I know what these years have been." Akosua was quiet for a moment. "I'm fine," she said. "I know you are," Abena said. "I just want you to be more than fine." They sat in silence. Somewhere down the street, someone was playing high-life music, and it drifted over the rooftops like smoke. Warm and unhurried, completely indifferent to the weight of the conversation sitting on that front step. "I have something to tell you," Abena said finally. She told her about the Korean Medical Association Legacy Award, given once per decade, to a physician who had demonstrated not just clinical excellence but cultural contribution, someone who had built bridges between worlds that had never been mapped onto each other before. Abena had been nominated, the first African doctor in the award's 40-year history to receive a nomination. The ceremony was in 4 months. "When I receive it," Abena said, "not if, never if. I'm saying your name on that stage. I've already told the committee. This award belongs to both of us. It belongs to the 14-year-old girl who grabbed my hand in front of that television and decided the same dream at the exact same moment." Akosua looked at her sister for a long time. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know I don't have to," Abena said. "That's why I want to." The 4 days that followed were the best days Akosua had known in years. They were loud and warm and full of the specific joy that only exists when you are with the one person in the world who knows the complete version of you, not the edited version, not the performed version, the actual one, and loves it without reservation. 4 days. That was what they got. It was Akosua's idea to go out. A club in Osu, one of their old spots from years ago, when they were young and the city felt like it belonged to them. They dressed up. They danced. They drank more than they should have. Mommy called twice by midnight and they laughed and promised to be home soon. They left at 1 a.m., sharing a taxi with 2 friends, the windows down, the night warm, the kind of night that feels like it will last forever while you are inside it. The road was dark. The driver was not drunk. That detail matters, because the investigation confirmed it later. It was a lorry that had lost control of its brakes on the hill and crossed into the oncoming lane without warning and without time. The impact was on the passenger side, Abena's side. Akosua woke up in a hospital with a broken arm and 3 fractured ribs, and a consultant she didn't recognize, leaning over her saying words she couldn't process. She already knew, before he finished the sentence, what he was going to say. She had always known what Abena was thinking, what Abena was feeling, where Abena was in a room without looking. She knew the moment that connection went quiet, the way you know when music stops, not from sound, but from the sudden presence of silence where something used to be. She lay in that hospital bed and stared at the ceiling and did not cry. Not because she wasn't destroyed, but because the body, when it encounters something too enormous to process, does not collapse. It goes very, very still. And it begins, quietly, without announcement, to calculate. It was in that stillness that she realized it. Nobody had told Minjun. She lay there and turned the thought over carefully, the way you turn something fragile. Abena's phone was gone, shattered in the crash, confirmed by the officer who had come to the hospital with Abena's belongings in a plastic bag. Mommy didn't have his number. They had never needed it. Abena was always the bridge, always the one in the middle, always the one who connected every piece of her world to every other piece. And now, the bridge was gone. The only person who could tell him was lying in a hospital bed in Accra with a broken arm and 3 fractured ribs and a ceiling to stare at. Not over the phone, she thought. The thought arrived fully formed, not as a plan, not as a decision, just as a truth she recognized the moment she met it. Not like this. Not over the phone. I'll go to Seoul. I'll tell him myself. It felt like protection. It felt like the last thing she could do for her sister. Make sure the man who loved her heard the news from a human face, from someone who had been there, from someone who understood what was lost. That was what she told herself. That was the story she gave the decision to make it feel like love. She did not examine it further. Not yet. The funeral was held on a Saturday. Accra woke up that morning the way it always does, loud and warm and completely indifferent to private pain. Trotros grinding down the road, hawkers calling out prices from the street. Someone frying kelawel 2 compounds away, the smell of it drifting over the walls without asking permission. The world outside the Mensa compound had no idea, and that indifference was its own particular cruelty. Inside the compound, the world had stopped. Black cloth was everywhere. On the women's shoulders, tied around the men's wrists, draped over chairs and tables, and over the small plastic stool in the corner where Abena used to sit as a child doing her homework while Mame sewed beside her. Someone had placed a white handkerchief on that stool. Nobody moved it. Nobody could bring themselves to move it. Akosua moved through the day like a woman made of stone. She received visitors at the gate and guided them in. She directed the food, who had brought what and where it should go. She accepted condolences with her face arranged in an expression so perfectly composed, so precisely calibrated between grief and dignity, that several women remarked quietly to each other how remarkable she was, how collected, how strong. She heard them say it. She said thank you each time, and she meant none of it. Not because she was lying, but because she was not yet inside her own body enough to mean anything at all. The afternoon came, between one group of departing visitors and the next arriving, a brief window of quiet. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. Mommy was sitting in her good chair, the wide one with the carved wooden armrests that only came out for weddings and funerals, and the rare occasions that required the house to show its best face to the world. She had been holding herself together all day with the specific dignity of a woman who understands that public composure is not a choice, but a form of honor. But in that gap, in that brief quiet with no one left to perform for, something in Mommy finally gave way. She looked at Akosua, not at the sky, not at the compound, at Akosua, directly at her face, and said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, that was not a speech, and was not meant to wound, and came entirely from a place too deep and too raw to be filtered. If God wanted any of my daughters, he wouldn't have chosen you. The compound went silent. The way air changes when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Akosua was standing 6 feet away. She was holding a cup of water she had just refilled and was about to bring to someone. She heard every word. She heard the words that were spoken and the words that weren't. Both of them, equally clearly. She set the cup down carefully on the nearest flat surface, turned, walked, down the short corridor and through the doorway into the room she and Abena had shared, since before either of them was old enough to understand what sharing meant. She sat on Abena's side of the bed. Not her own side. Abena's. She placed her hands flat on her knees, looked at the wall directly in front of her, and breathed. In and out. In and out. The room smelled like Abena, just barely, impossibly. The faintest trace of the Korean body lotion she used, mixed with something underneath it, something warmer and older, the specific smell of a person's actual skin that no product can ever fully replace. Akosua breathed it in and did not cry. She sat there for 40 minutes. When she came back out, her face was calm. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were still. No one who looked at her could have named anything different. She looked exactly the same as before, but she wasn't. Something behind her eyes had shifted and settled, reorganized itself into a new arrangement. Something had made a decision that the rest of her would spend the next several months catching up to. That night, after the last visitor left, after Mommy had been guided gently to bed, after the compound had finally gone completely quiet, Akosua sat alone at the kitchen table in the dark. She didn't turn the light on. She just sat. And then she remembered the briefcase, Abena's work briefcase, the structured black leather one with the Seoul National Forensic Medicine Institute monogram she had been so proud of the day she bought it. She brought it out, unzipped it slowly. Inside, working files, case notes in Abena's precise handwriting, a USB drive labeled with a date from 3 months ago, and at the very bottom, an envelope, flat and careful, placed there deliberately, the way Abena placed everything. Her name on the front in Abena's handwriting, for Akosua. And beneath it, in slightly smaller letters, if anything ever happens. She opened it. The paper inside was folded in thirds, the way you fold a formal letter. Of course it was, because Abena folded everything properly, even this. Even the last thing she would ever write to her sister. The handwriting was steady. No tremor, no hurry, no urgency in the pen strokes. Just Abena's regular hand, calm and exact, and completely herself right to the very end. Sua, if you are reading this, it means I was too organized for my own good, and wrote a letter I prayed with everything in me you would never need. I'm so sorry if you need it. I need you to hear something from me, clearly, without you deflecting, without you turning it into a joke before it can land. Because I know every defense mechanism you have. I helped you build some of them. You were never the lesser twin. Not once. Not in any room. Not in any version of any story I have ever told about us. To colleagues, to strangers on planes, to Minjun, every single day. Your photographic memory, the thing you have spent your whole life treating like a consolation prize, is one of the most extraordinary things I have ever witnessed in a human being. I watched you absorb in one afternoon what took me 3 weeks, and then I watched you treat that gift like it didn't count, like it only counted if it came attached to the grit you hadn't found yet. The Legacy Award ceremony is in 4 months. My name is on the nomination. But it was never only my name. I have already told the committee. This award belongs to both of us. It belongs to the 14-year-old girl who grabbed my hand and decided the same dream at the exact same moment. Whatever you choose, choose it fully, not halfway, not with one hand already on the exit door. Fully, the way you always defended me, that kind of fully. Now let it be you on the line. One more thing. Minjun already loves you and he hasn't even properly met you yet. He asks about you constantly. Every story I tell him, he says the same thing. When do I finally get to meet the fearless Akosua? All my love. All of it. Every last piece. Abena. Akosua read it once, then again, then a third time. Slower. As if rereading it could extend the experience of being spoken to by the only voice she had ever fully trusted. Then she folded it back along its original creases, precisely the way Abena would have, slid it back into the envelope, pressed it flat between both palms, and held it against her chest in the dark, in the silence, in the room that still barely, impossibly, smelled like her sister. She didn't pray. She didn't make a plan. She just sat, and held the letter, and breathed. And something that had been still for a very long time began quietly, without announcement, without permission from anyone, to move. The morning after, Mommy said almost nothing. She moved through the compound like a woman navigating rooms she no longer recognized. She made tea she didn't drink. She folded cloth she didn't cut. She sat in her good chair and looked at the wall with the expression of someone who has used up every word they had and has nothing left to say to anyone. She did not look at Akosua. Not once. The compound felt smaller than it ever had. Like the walls had moved inward an inch overnight, and the air was just slightly less than what two people needed. Akosua packed quietly. Abena's carry-on bag, the small tan leather one with the Yonsei University luggage tag still attached, because Abena had been too sentimental to replace it. Abena's passport, because their faces were the same face. Abena's work briefcase, because inside it was a USB drive, and a letter, and a story that wasn't finished yet. She stood in the doorway of the room they had shared and looked at it for a long moment. Abena's mirror on the wall, hung at Abena's height, because Abena was 2 centimeters taller and had put it there at 17, and it had never been moved. She looked at her own face in it. Then she turned away. She found Mommy in the sitting room. "I need a few days," she said. "Away. To clear my head." Mommy looked at her for the first time that morning. Her eyes were the eyes of a woman with nothing left to give, to ask, to withhold. She nodded once, looked away. Akosua walked out of the compound, through the gate, into the street where Accra was already loud and warm, and completely indifferent to what was happening inside one woman walking toward a taxi with her dead sister's bag on her shoulder. She told herself she was going to tell him. She told herself she was going to Seoul to deliver news in person. Out of love, out of respect, out of the last promise she could keep. She told herself a lot of things in that taxi to the airport. She believed most of them. For a while, she had Abena's face, Abena's passport, Abena's briefcase, Abena's bag, and a letter that said, "When do I finally get to meet the fearless Akosua?" She was going to Seoul to tell a man his wife was dead. That was what she told herself. That was the last clean version of the story she would have for a very long time. The immigration officer at Incheon was a man of maybe 50, efficient, unhurried, the kind of face that has processed 10,000 passports and stopped being surprised by any of them. He took Abena's passport, looked at the photo, looked at her face, then back at the photo. 3 full seconds. The kind of 3 seconds that have a physical weight, that press against the chest from the inside. Akosua stood completely still. She did not smile too wide. She did not look away. She did not do any of the things that innocent people do when they are nervous and trying not to look nervous. She simply stood there and held his gaze with the specific stillness of a woman who had decided on the plane that stillness was the only tool she had, and she was going to use it with everything she had. He looked at the photo one more time. Then he nodded, stamped the passport, and slid it back under the glass. "Welcome back, Dr. Mensah." She took the passport. She walked through the gate, on legs that did not feel like hers, through air that did not feel like air, into a country that did not know that the woman who just entered it was not the woman whose name was in the document. She walked through the gate and the world kept moving. Travelers and trolleys and airport noise flowing around her like water around stone, completely indifferent to what had just happened, to what she had just done. Minjun was waiting at arrivals. She saw him before he saw her, standing at the barrier with his hands in his coat pockets, scanning the faces coming through the doors, the way people scan crowds when they are both dreading and desperately needing what they are waiting for. He was exactly as Abena had described him. Quiet, precise. The kind of handsome that doesn't announce itself but stays in a room after the person has left. She watched the exact moment he found her face. She watched him go completely still. Not the stillness of recognition, not the loosening of relief that comes when you finally see the person you were waiting for. Something different. Something that looked, from the outside, like a man encountering a thing his eyes were telling him was familiar, but his body was telling him was not. He couldn't name it. She could see that clearly. The slight tilt of his head, the fraction of a second where his brain and his body were having a conversation that neither of them could finish. Then it passed. Or he pushed it past. He walked to her and she opened her arms and he stepped into them and held on. A beat too long. Not the embrace of a man relieved to have his wife home. The embrace of a man trying to locate something, reaching for a frequency he could almost hear, but couldn't quite tune into. She held him back. She said nothing. After a moment, he let go, picked up the carry-on bag without being asked, walked toward the exit. She followed. They drove home through Seoul, the Han River on their left, the city lighting itself up against the early dark of winter, and he asked about Mommy, about the compound, about the flight. She answered carefully. Enough words. Not too many. He nodded, looked at the road, and said nothing about the feeling that had walked through those arrivals doors wearing his wife's face. The apartment was exactly as Abena had described it. 3rd floor. North-facing windows that caught the afternoon light at a particular angle in winter. Books stacked on the nightstand in the specific order Abena preferred. Tallest on the left, smallest on the right, because she had once read that visual order promoted better sleep and had never stopped doing it since. Her white coat on the hook by the door. Her body lotion on the bathroom shelf. The Korean one with the gold cap. The one that still barely, impossibly, smelled like the room in Accra. Akosua stood in the doorway of the apartment and understood for the first time the full weight of what she had walked into. This was not a role she was stepping into from the outside. This was a life. A fully constructed, fully inhabited, completely specific life. With its own rhythms and rituals and small private arrangements that two people build together over years without even noticing they are building them. She set the carry-on bag down, sat at Abena's desk, opened the laptop, and then opened the briefcase and took out the USB drive. The files loaded slowly. Case reports, research notes, autopsy documentation going back 3 years. Abena's work spread across the screen in the precise, methodical architecture of a mind that had always known exactly what it was doing and exactly where it was going. Akosua began reading, and her photographic memory, the gift she had spent her entire life treating as a consolation prize, opened like a door she hadn't known was there. Medical terminology that should have taken months to retain she absorbed in days. Forensic documentation protocols, the specific language, The specific structure, the specific way a conclusion is constructed from evidence in this particular discipline, became architecture in her mind. Not memorization, architecture, the deep kind that stops being recall and starts becoming instinct. She read everything, everything except one folder, sitting at the bottom of the directory, labeled in Abena's neat font, Review, Do Not File. She hovered the cursor over it, then moved past it. Not yet. She was not ready for that yet. She had enough to carry. The evenings belonged to Minjun. He cooked. Always something specific. Always something that meant something. The first evening, it was the Ghanaian pepper soup that Abena had taught him in their first year of marriage, the one that had taken him 7 attempts to get right. He set it on the table without ceremony and sat across from her and asked about her day. She told him carefully. Enough truth, enough texture, enough of the right words in the right order. He nodded, talked about his own day, and then, quietly, without it seeming like anything deliberate, he began to talk about their life, their routines, their private rituals. You always make coffee before I'm awake. I don't know how you do it. I set an alarm and you're already up. She filed it. You reorganize the bookshelf every time you're stressed. I can always tell how a week has been by the state of that shelf. She filed it. You have a specific way of reading case files. You highlight in blue first, then go back and annotate in black. You said the 2 colors help you separate observation from interpretation. She filed it. He was not helping his wife recover from grief. He was handing Akosua Mensa the complete instruction manual for becoming her sister. And he had no idea. He thought he was reaching for someone who had gone quiet inside herself. He thought he was talking to bring her back. He thought, grief changes people. Give her time. She'll find her way back to me. But something kept him up at night. A feeling that sat in his chest the way a question sits before you have found the words for it. Shapeless, persistent, impossible to locate, and impossible to ignore. He would lie in the dark and turn it over and come up empty, and tell himself he was imagining things. He was a forensic accountant. He was trained to find what was hidden in plain sight. And somewhere beneath the logic, beneath the grief narrative he had constructed to explain the wrongness he felt, something in him was already beginning to look. She walked into the Seoul National Forensic Medicine Institute on a Tuesday morning in early December. Abena's ID badge on her coat, Abena's coat on her shoulders, Abena's name on every document she would touch that day. The security guard nodded. The receptionist said, Dr. Mensah, good to have you back. We're all so sorry for your loss. She said thank you. She said it the way Abena would have said it. Quietly, with a slight bow of the head. The specific acknowledgement of someone who receives condolences with grace, but does not perform them. She had practiced it. The corridors were exactly as they appeared in the Institute's training videos she had watched on Abena's laptop. She navigated them without hesitation. The staff watched her move through the building and said to each other, in the gentle way colleagues say things about someone who has been through something enormous, she seems different. Quieter than before. More deliberate. Grief changes people. Give her time. She sat in case reviews and said little and listened to everything. She reviewed documentation with the focused precision of someone who had absorbed the complete institutional language of this building in a week and a half, which she had. On day 3, reviewing a cold case file that had been passed to her as routine administrative work, she found it. A medication dosage recorded in the case notes that was inconsistent with the autopsy findings. Not dramatically wrong, subtly wrong. The kind of wrong that only registers if you are reading with the specific attention of someone who has memorized every protocol this building runs on. 2 senior staff members had signed off on the file without catching it. She flagged it, quietly, without announcement, without explanation. She simply noted it in the margin in Abena's handwriting. The handwriting she had been practicing every morning at the desk until her pen moved in the same patterns and her signatures were indistinguishable from the originals. Later, she stood in the records room after everyone had left, and she shook. Not from fear, not from guilt, from something she hadn't felt in years, the specific, vertiginous, overwhelming sensation of discovering that you are capable of something you had stopped believing was possible. She stood in that records room and laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it at all. She was doing it. She was actually doing it. 3 weeks in. It was a Sunday, Minjun at his desk, Akosua at hers, the apartment quiet with the particular Sunday quiet of two people existing in the same space in comfortable parallel. She had been circling the folder for days. Every time she opened the laptop, she saw it sitting there. Review. Do not file. And every time she moved past it. But today, something was different. Maybe it was the 3 weeks of absorbing everything in that building. The language, the protocols, the institutional history all the way back to the Institute's founding. Maybe it was the letter, still folded in her coat pocket wherever she went. Whatever you choose it fully. Maybe it was simply that she had run out of reasons not to look. She clicked the folder. It opened. One file inside, a case report dated 23 years ago. She opened it. The cover sheet identified it as a closed investigation. Cause of death: cardiac arrest, accidental. Case status: closed. Authorized by Director K. Woo-jin. She began reading, and 3 pages in, she found Abena's notes, written in the margins in that precise, unhurried hand. Blue ink. Annotated in black. Talk screen inconsistent with cardiac presentation. Potassium chloride levels. See page 7. Not accidental. Masked. Someone signed this off knowing. She turned to page 7. Read it. Read it again. Turned back to the cover sheet. The victim's name was Han Soo-yeon, a woman, 31 years old at the time of her death. The case had been closed the same week it was opened, signed off, authorized, filed, by the Institute's founding director. She scrolled to the signature, Kang Woo-jin. She read the name, read it again, and then, very slowly, she looked up from the screen, through the open doorway of the study, across the hallway, to the living room, where Kang Minjun was sitting at his desk with his back to her, working quietly, completely unaware of what she had just found in the folder his wife had labeled "Do Not File." Abena had found it. A death-ruled accidental that was not accidental. A case signed off and buried by the man who built this institute, the man whose son was sitting 10 feet away, and Abena had gone home to Accra, and Abena had died in a car accident. And now Akosua was sitting in Abena's chair, at Abena's desk, holding Abena's secret, with Abena's husband in the next room. And the question she could not stop the shape of forming in her mind was not what happened to Han Soo-yeon. It was the lorry on the hill really just a lorry on the hill? She didn't sleep that night. She sat at Abena's desk until the city outside the window went from dark to the particular gray that arrives before dawn. Not light yet, just the suggestion of it. The world, remembering it, knows how to begin again. She pulled every thread she could find. The Institute's digital archive went back 30 years. Most of it was accessible on Abena's credentials: case files, research records, institutional reports, the administrative history of a building that had been processing the truth of how people died since before either of them was born. Han Soo-yeon. She started with the name. What she found took her 4 hours to assemble and about 40 seconds to understand. Han Soo-yeon had been a senior documentation clerk at the Institute, 23 years ago, back when the building was still finding its shape, still establishing the protocols and hierarchies that would define it for the next 2 decades. She had been quiet, methodical. The kind of person who notices things precisely because nobody is watching her closely enough to notice that she is noticing. Over the course of 8 months, she had been compiling a file. Not a formal complaint. Not yet. A private file. Careful and specific and damning. Case reports where the cause of death had been altered after the initial examination. Autopsy findings that contradicted the conclusions filed with the court. Powerful clients, a construction conglomerate, a government contractor, a family with enough money to make inconvenient truths very conveniently disappear, whose cases had been closed with findings that bore very little resemblance to the actual evidence. All of it signed off by the Institute's founding director, Kang Minjun. Han Soo-yeon had been 3 days away from submitting her file to the National Medical Ethics Board. She died on a Tuesday evening. Cardiac arrest, ruled accidental. Case closed within the week, signed by Kang Minjun. Her own death, filed by the man whose crimes she was about to expose. Akosua sat back in the chair. She looked at the ceiling. Then she opened Abena's notes again, the ones in the margins, blue ink annotated in black, and she read them with the full weight of what she now knew. Abena had found the same file, not by accident. She had been looking, quietly, methodically, for months, pulling the same threads, building the same picture, arriving at the same conclusion. She had been rebuilding Han Soo-yeon's original file from fragments, cross-referencing archived reports, flagging inconsistencies, documenting the pattern with the specific, unhurried precision of a forensic scientist who understands that the truth doesn't expire. And then, Abena had gone home to Accra for 4 days of joy and a night out in Osu and a lorry on a hill that nobody saw coming. Akosua stared at the screen. She stared at it for a long time. The question had been forming since she first saw the folder name, since she first read the signature, since she first understood what her sister had been building in the quiet hours of this apartment, at this desk, in this chair. She hadn't let herself ask it directly. She had been keeping it at the edges of her thinking, the way you keep something painful just outside the center of your vision because looking at it directly means accepting that it is real. But it was real, and she was done not looking at it. Was it really just a lorry on a hill? Or did someone know what Abena had found? Did someone know she was about to come back to Seoul and finish it? Did someone decide that the most convenient thing was a road accident in Accra, far away, another country, another jurisdiction, nothing to do with the Institute, nothing to do with Seoul? Nothing to do with a 23-year-old file that should have stayed buried? She didn't have an answer. She didn't have proof. What she had was a pattern. And patterns, Abena had written in the margins of her notes, don't lie. She was more careful after that. She accessed the files in shorter sessions, different times of day, never the same sequence twice. She began making her own notes, not on the laptop, not on anything connected to the Institute's network. A small notebook. Her own handwriting. Not Abena's. Just hers. The first thing in weeks that belonged entirely to Akosua. Minjun noticed on a Wednesday. He was in the kitchen when she came home. She didn't see him immediately, moved straight to the desk, opened the laptop, navigated to a case record with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing it for weeks. He watched from the doorway for a moment, said nothing. Set the kettle on and went back to the kitchen. But his mind had already begun the thing it was built for. He was a forensic accountant. 20 years of training to find what was hidden inside numbers, the small deviations, the patterns that repeated in ways that were almost invisible, but not quite. The signatures that people left in data without knowing they were leaving them. He began, that Wednesday evening, to keep his own record. Not of her. Of the files. He had access. Administrative access. The kind that came with 20 years on the Institute's board retainer. To the access logs. He could see which files had been opened. When. For how long? He pulled the log for the last 3 weeks and began reading. And the pattern he found there was not the pattern of a forensic pathologist working active cases. It was the pattern of someone following a trail, a very specific trail, one that led in a direction he recognized, because it was a direction he had been avoiding for most of his adult life. He closed the log, sat with it, and said nothing. Not yet. They were circling the same truth from opposite directions, two people in the same apartment, at separate desks, working toward the same buried thing. Neither of them knowing the other was looking. The audience knows. And that knowledge sits in the chest like a stone. The unbearable tension of watching two people who need to be on the same side and don't yet know they already are. Dr. Yoon Ji-soo had known Abena Mensah for 6 years. She was the Institute's senior forensic pathologist, 12 years Abena's senior, the person who had first seen what Abena was capable of, and had spent 6 years making sure everyone else saw it too. She had been the one who submitted Abena's name for the Legacy Award nomination. She had been the one who cried in the bathroom after the call from Accra, alone, quietly, for exactly 7 minutes, and then washed her face and went back to work, because that was what Abena would have done. She had been watching since day one, not suspiciously, with the attention of someone who loves carefully, who pays attention not to judge, but because paying attention is how love maintains itself across time. She noticed on the 3rd day that the pen was wrong. Abena held a pen with her index finger slightly raised, an idiosyncrasy from a childhood injury that had healed wrong and left her with a grip that was entirely her own. This Abena held it flat. She noticed on the 7th day that the laugh was wrong. Not in tone. The tone was extraordinary, precise, almost identical. In timing. Abena laughed at the resolution of a joke. This one laughed at the setup. She noticed on the 14th day that the walk was wrong. The slight forward lean Abena had when moving with purpose through a corridor was there, but the left shoulder didn't drop the way it should, the way it had for 6 years, the way Jisoo would have known in a dark corridor from 20 feet away. She said nothing. She filed every observation in the precise internal archive of a woman who had spent a career knowing the difference between what was presented and what was true. And she watched. Akosua came home on a Thursday evening to find the apartment quiet. Minjun's coat on the hook, his shoes by the door, the kitchen clean. And on the counter, a note. No envelope, no greeting, no name. Just his handwriting, small and exact. The handwriting of a man who had spent 20 years making precision into a habit, on a single sheet of paper folded once. She picked it up. I don't know what you're carrying. I don't know what happened in Accra. The full version, the version you haven't said. But something is wrong and I can see it. I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm not asking you to perform being fine. I'm just telling you. Whatever it is, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Just talk to me. She read it standing in the hallway, coat still on, bag still on her shoulder. She read it once. Then again. She stood there for 4 full minutes. She knew because she watched the clock on the kitchen wall, the way you watch something when you need an external reference point to stay inside your own body. He thought he was writing to his wife. He thought this was a note to a woman who had witnessed her twin sister's death and had come home carrying something she hadn't found words for yet. He was trying to reach her. He thought if he left enough space, if he made it safe enough, she would come back to the version of herself he recognized. He had no idea there was no going back to that version. She stood there for 4 minutes. Then she picked up her bag and walked back out. The note from Minjun stayed folded in her coat pocket for the rest of the week. She didn't throw it away. She didn't know what that meant. She told herself it didn't mean anything. The administrator's name was Park Hyung-chul. He was 63 years old, had been with the Institute since its 2nd year of operation, and had the particular quality of a man who had made himself indispensable by knowing exactly where all the inconvenient things were kept, and making sure they stayed there. He called her into his office on a Friday afternoon. End of the week, end of the day, the building emptying around them. The timing was deliberate. She understood that immediately. His office was on the fourth floor. Corner room, large windows, a view of the Han River that was beautiful enough to feel like a message about who had access to beautiful things in this building. He offered her tea. She accepted. He poured it, set it in front of her, sat back in his chair with the relaxed authority of a man who has never, in 40 years, had a conversation in this building that didn't go the way he intended. "Dr. Mensah," he said, "we are all so glad to have you back. The Institute was not the same without you. And of course, given everything you've been through, we want to make sure your return is as comfortable as possible." She nodded, said thank you. "Part of that," he continued, his voice as smooth and unhurried as the tea he had poured, "means making sure you're not burdening yourself with work outside your current caseload. Some of our historical files, older cases, administrative records, are currently under review. Routine process. But until that review is complete, access requires specific authorization from my office." He smiled, the smile of a man delivering a warning in the language of institutional procedure. "I'm sure you understand," he said. "Of course," she said. She picked up the tea, took a sip, set it down. "Is there anything specific I should be aware of? Any particular files?" His smile didn't change. "Nothing specific, just general housekeeping. We want to make sure everything is in order." She nodded, stood, thanked him for the tea, walked out of his office down the corridor to the lift, and stood inside it as the doors closed, alone, the floor numbers descending above her head, and felt, for the first time since she had landed at Incheon, something cold move through her that was not grief and was not guilt. It was fear. Clean, specific, well-founded fear. Not the fear of being caught. Something sharper. Someone in this building knew what Abena had been looking at. Someone in this building had been watching, and Abena, who had been looking at the same files, had gone home to Accra and never come back. She stood in the lobby of the Seoul National Forensic Medicine Institute on a Friday evening while the building emptied around her, and she understood. For the first time, with the full weight of what understanding actually costs, she understood. This was not about identity anymore. This was not about whether she could maintain a performance, whether her photographic memory was good enough, whether her Korean was fluid enough, whether the staff would eventually notice the pen, the laugh, the shoulder. This was about a woman who had found a truth powerful people had buried for 23 years. And that woman was dead. And now, Akosua was sitting in her chair, with her files, with her notes, with the same unfinished thing in her hands. She stood in the lobby and thought about the lorry on the hill. She thought about the timing. Abena going home to Accra right when the evidence was almost complete. She thought about Park Hyung-chul's smile, that smooth, unhurried, completely confident smile. She thought about Kang Minjun. She thought about Minjun. She thought about the note still folded in her coat pocket. "Whatever it is, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." And she thought about Abena, sitting at this same desk, in this same building, pulling the same threads, alone, and never telling anyone what she had found. Akosua walked out into the Seoul evening. The Han River was dark. The city was loud. The world was completely indifferent. She put her hands in her pockets, felt the note, and walked. She had come to Seoul to tell a man his wife was dead. She had stayed because she couldn't leave. She had found the file because Abena had left it for her. And now she understood. The people who had buried Han Suyan's truth for 23 years already knew someone was looking. They had known before. And the last person who had been looking was dead. The question was no longer, can she pull this off? The question was, how long before they realize she is looking too? It happened on a Tuesday. Case review. The weekly meeting where the Institute's senior staff gathered around the long table on the third floor and walked through active investigations, pending documentation, cases requiring second review. Akosua had been attending for 6 weeks. She had learned the rhythm of it. Who spoke first? Who deferred to whom? The specific hierarchy of voices in that room that had nothing to do with the organizational chart and everything to do with 30 years of accumulated authority. She had learned to say the right things in the right order and to be quiet in the moments Abena would have been quiet. She had been, by every visible measure, managing. The meeting ended. People gathered papers. Conversations fractured into smaller conversations. The room began to empty the way rooms empty after obligatory gatherings, with the specific relief of people returning to the work they actually wanted to do. Dr. Yoon Ji-soo did not leave. She stood at the end of the table and waited, with the patience of someone who had decided exactly what she was going to say and was not in any hurry because she had already rehearsed it many times. When the last person left and the door closed, she looked at Akosua. "Stay a moment," she said. Not a question. The room was quiet now, the long table between them, the window behind Jisoo showing a gray December sky over the Han River, flat and still and entirely indifferent. Jisoo didn't sit. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her and looked at Akosua with the expression of a woman delivering a verdict she had already reached some time ago. "I don't know who you are," she said, quietly, not unkindly, but with the specific precision of someone who has measured every word before speaking it and is not interested in softening what is true. "But I know you are not Abena." The room held its breath. Akosua said nothing. Her face did not change. "I have known for 3 weeks," Jisoo continued. "The pen, the laugh, the way you move through a corridor when you think no one is watching, the way you hold a case file. She always held it by the spine. You hold it by the corner. Small things. Individually, nothing. Together." She stopped. Let the silence finish the sentence. "I haven't said anything," she said, "because whoever you are doing something she cared about. I can see it in what you've been accessing. I can see it in the way you sat in that meeting today and listened, really listened, the way she used to listen when she was building something. So, finish it. Whatever she started, finish it, and then tell me the truth." She held Akosua's gaze, steady, unafraid. The eyes of a woman who had spent 30 years in rooms full of difficult things and had never once looked away from any of them. Akosua stared at her for a long time, long enough that the silence stopped being a defense and became something else. The specific quality of quiet that exists just before someone decides to trust. She exhaled. She told her everything, not the edited version, not the version designed to manage the listener's reaction. Everything. Accra, the crash, the hospital, the funeral, the 7 words, the letter, the passport, Incheon, Minjun in the arrivals hall, the apartment, the USB drive, the folder, the name on the signature. She told it the way you tell something to the first person you have been honest with in a very long time, with the relief of it, the exhaustion of it, the specific weight that lifts when you finally put something down. Jisoo listened. She did not interrupt. She did not react visibly. She listened the way she had listened to 6 weeks of case reviews, with complete, unhurried attention. When Akosua finished, Jisoo was quiet for a moment. Then she said, She never told me about the Suyan file. I knew she was working on something. She had that specific look, the one she got when she was close to something important. I should have asked. Her voice was even, but something in it was not. I should have asked, she said again. The second time was not for Akosua. Akosua understood that. She waited. Then Jisoo looked up. How much of the evidence has she reconstructed? Most of it. I've been filling the gaps for the last 3 weeks. What do you still need? Testimony. Someone inside the building who was here when it happened. Someone who saw enough to corroborate what the documentation shows. Jisoo nodded slowly. I was here when it happened, she said. I was a junior researcher, 23 years old. Han Soo-yeon was in the office 3 floors above mine. I noticed things. I didn't understand what I was noticing. But I noticed. She looked at Akosua with the eyes of a woman who had been carrying something for 23 years and had never had anywhere to set it down. Tell me what you need, she said. Jisoo became her quiet ally. Not dramatically, not with speeches, in the way that certain people show up for you, through small, consistent, completely reliable acts that ask nothing in return. She covered for Akosua in meetings where questions might have become dangerous. She provided institutional context Akosua couldn't have found in any file, the things that are never written down, that live only in the memory of people who were present. She sat across from her in the canteen at lunchtime and spoke about Abena, not with performed grief, but with the plain, unadorned language of someone describing a person they actually knew. She used to eat at her desk. I told her every week, take a break, eat a proper lunch. She would say yes, and then I would find her at her desk with a container of rice and 3 case files open beside it. She smiled. The particular smile of someone holding a memory they don't want to put down. I'm going to say her name at the hearing, Jisoo said. Whatever happens, her name is on this. It was always her name on this. Minjun came home on a Thursday evening later than usual. Akosua heard the door. She was at the desk. The notebook open beside the laptop, 3 windows on the screen. The Han Soo-yeon file cross-referenced against 2 supporting documents she had spent the week locating. She heard him set his keys down. Heard the particular quiet of a man moving through an apartment without the sounds of someone who has let their guard down for the evening. She heard him stop in the hallway. Then the doorway of the study darkened. She turned. He was standing there in his coat. Still on. Not yet removed. The coat of a man who had come home with something to say and hadn't decided yet whether to say it sitting down or standing up. He looked at her. Something in his expression was different tonight. Not the watchfulness she had grown used to. The vigilant, careful watchfulness of a man navigating something he couldn't name. This was different. This was the expression of a man who had found what he was looking for, who wished he hadn't. You've been looking at the Suyan file, he said. Not a question. Akosua looked at him. Yes, she said. A beat. So have I, he said. The room was very quiet. We need to talk, he said. She came to the kitchen table. He was already sitting, coat finally off, hands flat on the table, the posture of a man preparing himself for a conversation he understands is going to cost something significant. She sat across from him. The table between them was the same table she had sat at for 2.5 months. The same table where he had placed soup in front of her on her first evening. The same table where she had read his note in her coat with her bag on her shoulder. She looked at him, and she understood with complete clarity that there was no version of this conversation that let her stay on the side she had been on. There was only the truth, and the thing that came after it. She took a breath. My name is Akosua, she said. His face didn't change. I am Abena's twin sister. Something moved behind his eyes, just slightly. She died in the accident in Accra, the night we went out. The lorry on the hill. She was on the passenger side. I woke up in a hospital with a broken arm and 3 fractured ribs. And she was gone. He was completely still. I came to Seoul to tell you in person, not over the phone. I couldn't do it over the phone. And then I got here, and I saw the file, and I understood what she had been building, and She stopped. Started again. I couldn't leave. I don't have a better explanation than that. I couldn't leave it unfinished. I couldn't leave her unfinished. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For all of it. For every day of it. I'm sorry. The silence that followed was not the silence of a man receiving confirmation. It was not the release of someone who already knew and was finally hearing it said. It was something far worse than that. It was the silence of a man whose entire understanding of the last 2.5 months, every evening, every conversation, every note left on a counter, every night of lying awake trying to locate the thing that was wrong, restructuring itself, in real time, in front of her eyes. He found out 2 things simultaneously, and she watched both of them land in the same moment in the same body. His wife was dead, and this woman had been living in his home for 2.5 months. He didn't break dramatically. There was no collapse. His face did something more unbearable than that. It went completely still. The stillness of a structure that has just had its central support removed and has not yet begun to fall. That terrible suspended moment before the falling. He looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he turned away, just to have somewhere to put his face that wasn't in front of another person. He faced the window. The city outside, loud and indifferent. The Han River dark. The lights of Seoul carrying on with absolute certainty that nothing significant was happening in this apartment on this night. He stood like that for a long time. She didn't speak. She understood that the worst thing she could do was fill this silence with anything. Some silences need to be exactly the size they are. Finally. How did she? His voice broke on the word. Just slightly. Just enough. He didn't finish the sentence. It was fast, Akosua said, quietly. She didn't suffer. I was with her. Right until the end, I was there. She was not alone. He nodded once, the nod of a man accepting something he will spend years actually absorbing. He didn't speak again for a long time. The city kept going outside the window. The Han River kept moving. The kitchen clock marked the seconds one at a time with its small, indifferent sound. And then, he turned back. He looked at her. Not with anger, not with accusation, with the eyes of a man who has just lost the person he organized his entire life around, and who is standing in the rubble of that life, and who has found, in the middle of that rubble, something he was not expecting to find. The file, he said. His voice was steady now. The steadiness of someone who is located in the aftermath of devastation, the one thing that still has a direction. Finish it. Whatever she started, finish it. She was 3 months away from having everything she needed. I've been looking at the same records. I have the financial trail, the payments, the accounts, the names. Between what she found and what I found, we have everything. Finish it. And then, he stopped, looked at her. And then we figure out the rest. He stood, picked up his coat from the chair, walked to the hallway. The bedroom door closed behind him. Not slammed, just closed. The soft, deliberate, final sound of a man who needs to be somewhere that is entirely his own for a while. Akosua sat at the kitchen table alone. The clock kept moving. The city kept going. She sat with her hands flat on the table, the same way he had sat, and looked at the grain of the wood and breathed. In, out. She had told the truth. After 2.5 months of being someone else, of performing, absorbing, constructing, maintaining, she had sat at this table and said her own name. My name is Akosua. And the world had not ended. It had broken, yes. It had cracked along every seam she had been managing for months. But it had not ended. She was still here. At this table. In this kitchen. In this city. With Abena's file on the screen in the next room and 3 months of work still to finish. And a man behind a closed door who had just lost his wife for the second time, once in Accra on a hill, and once at this kitchen table from the mouth of her twin sister. She sat there for a long time. Then she stood, walked to the study, opened the laptop, and went back to work. She had said her own name. For the first time in months. Her own name, at her own risk, at maximum cost. And he had not called the police. He had not asked her to leave. He had said, "Finish it." Which meant one thing: he already knew what his father had done. And he had been waiting for someone with enough of a reason to finish what had been started. Now he had found her. Or she had found him. Or Abena, organized, precise, always 3 steps ahead, had arranged it from the beginning. They worked at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, Akosua, Minjun, Jisoo, arriving at different hours, leaving at different hours, the apartment never fully empty and never fully loud, just continuously occupied by the specific focused energy of people building something that cannot afford to have gaps in it. Minjun had moved back into the apartment 2 days after the confession, not with fanfare, not with a conversation that resolved everything cleanly, because nothing had been resolved cleanly, and both of them understood that pretending otherwise would be a different kind of lie than the ones already on the table. He had simply appeared on a Saturday morning with his laptop and a bag of groceries, and sat at the kitchen table and opened his files. She looked at him. He looked at the screen. 3 days isn't enough time to be complicated, he said. We can be complicated later. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she opened her laptop. And they went to work. What they were building had 3 pillars. The first belonged to Akosua. Her photographic memory, operating now with an urgency and focus she had never given it before, pointed at something that actually mattered. Had spent 2.5 months absorbing everything Abena had left. The case files, the research notes, the annotated margins, the USB drive, the fragments of a reconstruction that was 70% complete when Abena had gone home to Accra. Akosua filled the remaining 30%. She cross-referenced every autopsy report against the official filed conclusions. She mapped the pattern, case by case, year by year, client by client, of falsified findings going back 23 years. Not a single incident, a system. Deliberate, consistent, maintained. The kind of corruption that doesn't happen by accident but by design, by repeated choice, by the accumulated decisions of a man who had decided early that the truth was a commodity that could be adjusted to suit whoever was paying for it. She rebuilt Han Suyan's original file from the fragments Abena had left. The talk screen results. The inconsistencies in the cardiac report. The timeline of a death that had happened precisely when it needed to happen for a certain file to stop moving toward a certain board. She documented it in the precise, methodical, unreproachable language of forensic science, the language she had absorbed from Abena's notes, from 6 weeks at the Institute, from the photographic memory she was finally, after 31 years, using without apology. The second pillar belonged to Minjun. He had been a forensic accountant for 20 years. He had spent those 20 years finding what was hidden inside numbers, the small deviations, the patterns that repeated in ways almost invisible, but not quite, the signatures people leave in data without knowing they are leaving them. He had been avoiding one particular set of numbers for most of his adult life. He stopped avoiding them. What he found was the financial architecture of 23 years of silence, payments made to officials, retainers issued to people with no documented role, accounts that appeared in the Institute's books under classifications that didn't correspond to any legitimate expense. The money that kept Han Soo-yeon's case buried. The money that kept 3 other cases buried in the decade that followed. Smaller cases, quieter cases, people without Soo-yeon's documents or Soo-yeon's courage, but who had died in the same way, for the same reasons, signed off by the same hand. He laid it all out on a spreadsheet so clean, so precisely constructed, so methodically cross-referenced that it told its story without a single explanatory note. The numbers speaking for themselves in the only language that powerful people cannot argue with. He worked without sleeping for 48 hours straight. Akosua brought him coffee at 3 a.m. on the second night and found him staring at a column of figures with the expression of someone reading something they wish they could unread. She set the coffee down. He didn't look up. He built this institute, Minjun said, quietly. He built it from nothing. That's what he always said. From nothing. I believe that story my entire life. He was quiet for a moment. He did build it from nothing, he said. He just also built this. He closed the spreadsheet, picked up the coffee, went back to work. The third pillar belonged to Jisoo. She came to the apartment on the third evening with a folder she had been keeping in a locked drawer in her office at the Institute for 23 years. She set it on the table, sat down. I was 23 years old, she said. Junior researcher. First year. Everything was new and everything was unfamiliar, and I didn't yet know which things that felt wrong were wrong, and which were just the way institutions work when you're young and don't understand them yet. But Soo-yeon's case felt wrong. The timeline felt wrong. The speed of the closure felt wrong. The way people stopped talking about her. Not gradually, the way you stop talking about someone who has died, but immediately, the way you stop talking about something you have been told not to talk about. I wrote it down. Everything I noticed, everything I felt was wrong. I put it in a folder. I locked the folder. And I told myself I would know what to do with it when the time was right. She pushed the folder across the table. The time is right, she said. They were building something Abena had died for. And they were building it together. This is what Akosua understood. Somewhere in the middle of the second night, when the apartment was quiet and the city was asleep, and the 3 of them were still at the table. This was the thing Abena had been doing alone. For months. In this apartment. At this table. Without telling anyone. Not Minjun. Not Jisoo. Not the one person in the world she called every week from this chair. She had been carrying it alone. And Akosua understood, with the specific clarity that arrives at 2 a.m. when you are too tired to protect yourself from understanding things, that Abena had not told her because she had not wanted Akosua to carry it. She had written a letter that said, choose it fully. She had written a letter that left everything behind. The files, the USB drive, the unfinished work. Without instructions. Without asking. Because Abena had known with the precision of a woman who had memorized the architecture of her twin's heart over 31 years, that Akosua would find it, would open it, would not be able to leave it, would not quit. Not this one, not the one that mattered. Now let it be you on the line. She sat at the table at 2 a.m. and held that understanding in both hands, and went back to work. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. Minjun's phone. He looked at the screen. His jaw tightened by a fraction, the only visible sign of a man encountering something he had been expecting and had still not fully prepared for. He answered, Minjun Ah. The voice of a man accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room he entered. The voice of the man who had built an institute from nothing, and had built something else alongside it for 23 years. I'm told there are files being accessed, historical files, files that are under administrative review. I'm also told there is a woman in your apartment who is not your wife. Whatever she is doing, whatever she has found or thinks she has found, make her stop, or I will make her stop. A pause, not for effect. The pause of a man who has said this kind of thing before and knows exactly how long to leave it before the line. Do you understand me? Minjun looked at Akosua across the table. She had heard every word. He held her gaze. Then he said, I understand you, and hung up. He set the phone face down on the table, looked at it for a moment, then looked at Akosua. We have 3 days, he said. Before he moves on whatever he's planning, the ethics board submission needs to be in their hands before then. Everything, all of it, complete and submitted before he has time to make calls, move documents, activate whatever mechanisms he has been keeping oiled for 23 years against exactly this moment. He was calm, the particular calm of a man who has been building to a moment for a long time and has finally, irrevocably, arrived at it. Can we do it? Akosua asked. He looked at the files on the table, at hers, at his, at Jesu's folder. Yes, he said. We can do it. They worked without stopping. The apartment existed in a state of suspended time, meals eaten at the desk, sleep taken in short intervals, the city outside the window cycling through dark and light and dark again, without either of them paying it particular attention. It was on the second night, somewhere between midnight and the gray suggestion of dawn, that Akosua's phone lit up. An Accra number. She stared at it. It rang 4 times. She answered. Akosua. Mommy's voice. But not the mommy she had left in that compound. Not the mommy of the good chair and the cold shoulder and the 7 words delivered to a daughter's face with the full devastating weight of a grief that had run out of places to go. This was a different voice. The voice of a woman who had been sitting with something for a long time in a quiet compound and had arrived, somewhere in the dark of a Accra night, at the far side of it. A voice that had aged 10 years in 3 months. Are you alive? Just that. Not, where are you? Not, what are you doing? Not, why did you leave without telling me? Just, are you alive? Akosua closed her eyes. Yes, Mommy, she said. I'm alive. A silence, long enough to contain everything that had happened since the funeral, every unspoken thing. Every morning, Mommy had woken up in a compound that had gone from 2 daughters to none in a single week. Every night, she had sat in her good chair with the specific weight of knowing she had said something to a surviving daughter that she could never take back. Long enough to contain all of that. And then, come home when you're done. Whatever you're doing, come home. She hung up. Akosua held the phone against her chest. In the dark. In the quiet. In the apartment that still barely, impossibly smelled like her sister. She held it for a long moment. Then she set the phone down and went back to work. The submission was complete at 4:47 a.m. on a Friday morning. 112 pages. Forensic documentation. Financial records. Institutional testimony. Cross-referenced evidence reconstructed across 23 years. The full picture of what Kang Minjun had built in the space between the Institute's reputation and the truth. Han Soo-yeon's name on the cover page. Abena Mensah's name in the acknowledgments. This submission completes work begun and carried by Dr. Abena Mensah, Senior Forensic Pathologist, Seoul National Forensic Medicine Institute. It is submitted in her name and in her memory. Akosua sent it to the Korean Medical Association Ethics Board at 4:47 a.m. She received an automated confirmation at 4:48. She sat back in the chair, looked at the screen. Then she looked at the window. The city beginning, just, barely, to lighten at the edges. Seoul waking up, indifferent as always, beautiful as always. The Korean Medical Association Legacy Award ceremony was held that same evening at a hotel in Gangnam, the kind of room that knows what it is, that has hosted 30 years of institutional gravity and wears it without effort. Crystal, white tablecloths, the particular hush of a space full of people who understand that what happens here will be spoken about in corridors for a long time. Akosua arrived alone, not as Dr. Mensah, as Akosua Mensah, listed in the program as surviving twin sister of the late Dr. Abena Mensah, posthumous Legacy Award recipient. She wore black. Simple. No jewelry except Abena's watch. The one Abena had worn every day for 7 years. The one with the small crack in the face from the night of the accident that Akosua had not had repaired. She sat in the front row and looked at the room. It was the first time she had been in a public space as herself. Her name on the program, her face belonging to her. Since she had walked through Incheon arrivals on a December morning with someone else's passport and someone else's life waiting to be inhabited. It felt strange. The specific strangeness of wearing your own skin after a long time of wearing something else. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Like a word you have heard your whole life, but are only now hearing properly. Kang Minjun was 3 tables to her right. She knew without looking. She had located him the moment she walked in, the way you locate the thing in a room that has the most gravity. He was 71 years old, silver-haired, precisely dressed, the bearing of a man who had spent 50 years being the most important person in every room he entered and had stopped noticing that he expected it. He did not know what she had done that morning. The ethics board worked quietly. Acknowledgement of receipt, internal review, no public signal until the process was ready. He was sitting 3 tables away in a room named for the kind of excellence his institute had built. Not yet knowing that the foundation of that building had been submitted to a board of inquiry 14 hours ago. She did not look at him. She looked at the stage. The ceremony moved through its program with the measured pace of institutional ritual. Awards presented, speeches made, names called with the gravity they deserved. When they came to the Legacy Award, the room shifted. The chair of the association stood at the podium and spoke about Abena Mensah, about the 6 years at the Seoul National Forensic Medicine Institute, about the research, the cases, the nomination, the loss, about what it meant. A Ghanaian woman, the first African doctor in the award's history, receiving it posthumously in a room full of the people whose profession she had honored by bringing her whole self to it every single day. Dr. Mensah, he said, cannot be here to receive this award, but her twin sister can, Akosua Mensah, if you would come forward. She stood, walked to the stage, her heels on the floor. The room quiet, the lights precise and warm and completely indifferent to the particular weight of what was about to happen. She stood at the podium. She looked at the room, at the white tablecloths and the crystal and the faces turned toward her. Curious, respectful, expectant. At Jisoo, 3 rows back, hands folded, eyes steady. The expression of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this moment for 23 years. At Minjun, beside Jisoo, his face composed in the way of someone who has already cried everything he had in private and has arrived here with nothing left but clarity. At Kang Minjun, 3 tables to the right, watching her with the polite attention of a man who expects nothing remarkable from the next few minutes. She looked at all of them, and she spoke. My name is Akosua Mensah. Abena was my twin sister. We were born 3 minutes apart on a Tuesday morning in September in Accra, Ghana. We shared one face. We did not share one life. But we shared one dream. The same dream, decided in the same silence, on the same night. When we were 14 years old, and a woman in a white coat on a television screen showed us what it looked like to carry your culture into a room that had not made space for it, and make that space by the force of your presence. Abena carried that dream further than either of us had known how. To imagine. She built something here, in this city, in this field, in the specific, disciplined, extraordinary way she built everything, that was larger than any award in any room. She also found something here, a truth that powerful people had buried for 23 years, a woman named Han Soo-yeon who died before she could bring that truth forward. Abena spent months rebuilding what Soo-yeon had built, and then Abena came home to Accra, and Abena died, on a road, on a hill, in the city where she was born. She paused. The room was absolutely still. I came to Seoul to tell her husband she was gone, and I stayed, because she left something unfinished. Not this award. Something more important than this award. This morning at 4:47 a.m., the complete evidence file, 112 pages of forensic documentation, financial records, and institutional testimony, was submitted to the Korean Medical Association Ethics Board. What happens next is not in my hands, but it is no longer buried. Han Soo-yeon's name is no longer buried, and neither is Abena's. Her voice was steady, the way Abena's handwriting had been steady. No tremor, no hurry. Just itself. Right to the end. I want to tell you something my sister wrote to me, in a letter, that she placed in a briefcase and labeled, "If anything ever happens." She wrote, "Whatever you choose it fully. Not halfway. Not with one hand already on the exit door. Fully. The way you always defended me. That kind of fully. Now let it be you on the line." She looked at the room. I chose it fully. My name is Akosua Mensa. And this, all of this, was always both of ours. Silence. The particular silence of a room full of people encountering something they were not prepared for. Something that has passed through the professional and the institutional and arrived at something else entirely. Something that does not have a category in any program, any ceremony, any 30 years of ritual. The silence of people understanding that what just happened was not a speech. It was a life. Dr. Yoon Ji-soo stood up, not with theater, not with announcement. She simply rose from her seat, quietly, the way she did everything, and stood. Minjun stood beside her. Then a woman in the third row. Then two people at the back. Then the room. Not all at once. The way standing ovations happen in films, in a single dramatic wave. One by one, person by person. Each one a separate decision, until the room was standing. Until every person in it had made the individual choice to be upright in the presence of what had just been said. Akosua stood at the podium and looked at them. She did not cry. Not yet. She held the award, the heavy, solid, real weight of it, in both hands. Abena's name on the plaque. Her hands holding it. Both of theirs. 3 tables to the right, Kang Minjun had gone very still. He was not standing. He sat in his chair with the expression of a man watching something he built beginning to come apart, understanding that the 4:47 a.m. submission was not a threat anymore. It was already done. It was already in the hands of the board. It was already beginning the process it would complete without him. He sat very still in a standing room, and the world kept going around him, indifferent, as it always is, to the specific moment when powerful things begin to fall. The investigation began on a Monday morning, not dramatically, the way institutional processes begin, with a letter, formally addressed, delivered to the apartment in an envelope with the Korean Medical Association crest in the upper left corner. She had been expecting it. She opened it at the kitchen table, the same table where she had said her name out loud for the first time in months, and read it with the specific calm of someone who has already made peace with the consequences of a choice before the consequences arrive. Impersonation of a licensed medical professional, identity fraud, unauthorized use of a deceased person's credentials. The charges were serious, Correct. Deserved. She cooperated fully. There were interviews, many of them, in rooms that were deliberately neutral, gray walls, rectangular tables, two investigators with folders, and the particular expressions of people whose job requires them to remain professionally unmoved by things that are genuinely moving. She answered every question without evasion. She had made a decision, somewhere between the podium and the morning after, that the truth was the only thing she had left that was entirely hers, and she was not going to manage it, shape it, or perform composure around it one more time. She told them everything: the crash, the funeral, the 7 words, the letter, the passport, the apartment, the months of becoming someone she was not, and the work she had done while she was being someone she was not. She told them about the file, about Han Soo-yeon, about the pattern she and Minjun and Jisoo had spent 3 sleepless nights making undeniable. The investigators listened. They wrote things down. They asked her to come back the following week. She did. The medical board moved quickly, faster than she had expected, which told her that the evidence had been as clean as they had built it to be. The Han Soo-yeon case was formally reopened within 2 weeks of the ethics board submission. The reinvestigation was thorough, public, and moved with the specific momentum of an institution that understood it was making a historical correction and wanted to make it completely. The financial records Minjun had compiled were handed to the relevant authorities. The forensic documentation Akosua had rebuilt was verified by 3 independent pathologists who arrived at the same conclusion Abena had arrived at alone, in this apartment, months ago. Jisoo's testimony, 23 years of noticed things, documented in a locked drawer, waiting for exactly this moment, was entered into the record and received, as she had always known it would be, with the weight it deserved. Kang Minjun resigned from the Institute's board on a Wednesday. A statement was issued, brief, carefully worded, the language of a lawyer who had been paid well to construct a departure that acknowledged nothing while making continuation impossible. It did not matter. The investigation did not require his acknowledgement. The evidence did not need his cooperation. The truth, once submitted, once verified, once entered into the record of an institution that had been built on falsifying records. The truth did not need his permission to stand. He was 71 years old. He had spent 50 years being the most powerful person in every room he entered. He left the building on a Wednesday afternoon without ceremony, through a side entrance, not the main doors, and the building continued without him. The Institute's formal apology to Han Soo-yeon's family was issued on a Friday, 23 years after a woman had been buried with the wrong cause of death on her file. Her family, a younger brother, now 50, who had spent 23 years not understanding why his sister's case had been closed before it was opened, received it in a room with the Institute's new acting director, Jisoo, beside her, the letter in his hands. He read it, folded it, looked up. She would have wanted to know the truth mattered, he said. Tell the people who did this. Tell them it mattered. That she mattered. That she is not just a case number in a reopened file. She was my sister. She was trying to do the right thing. Tell them. Jisoo looked at him. We will, she said. I promise you. We will. The investigation into Akosua moved more slowly. The way things move when they are complicated by context, by consequence, by the specific difficulty of applying clean legal categories to something that did not happen cleanly. She had impersonated a licensed physician. She had used a deceased person's identity. She had committed fraud in a professional setting. These were facts. Also facts. No patient had been harmed. No surgery had been performed. No clinical decision with direct patient impact had been made under her name. The work she had done at that institute had been administrative, observational, documentation-based, and had resulted in the exposure of 23 years of institutional corruption. Also facts. She had submitted herself voluntarily. She had cooperated fully. She had said her own name on a public stage before the investigation had even formally begun. The board deliberated for 6 weeks. The outcome, when it came, was not nothing. She would not pretend it was nothing. There were formal sanctions, a permanent record, restrictions on professional use of her sister's credentials, as if she had needed to be told that that chapter was closed. But there was no criminal prosecution. The board had made a decision, not out of charity, not out of sentimentality, but out of the specific calculus of an institution weighing what had been done against what had been built from it. She walked out of the final interview on a gray Seoul morning in late February and stood on the steps of the building and looked at the sky. It was the color of something that had not decided yet whether to rain. She stood there for a moment. Just that. Then she went back to the apartment and started packing. He came on the last evening. She was surrounded by boxes, the apartment in the specific disarray of departure. Things sorted into what was Abena's and what was hers, and what belonged to the life she was leaving behind. He stood in the doorway the way he had stood in so many doorways in this apartment, watching her, the way he watched everything, with the attention of someone who sees what is present beneath what is visible. She looked up. He looked at the boxes, then at her. "I'm not coming to ask you to stay," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not coming with a speech. I don't have anything that resolves cleanly, I know that." She nodded. He came in, sat on the edge of the desk where she had spent months working, and looked at her in the way she had come to understand was simply how he looked at things he was serious about. "Abena told me about you every single day," he said. "I know," she said. "I know you know. I'm saying it anyway, because I want you to hear it from me, not from her letter, not from a story, from me." She said, "You have to meet my sister. She is the most fearless person I know." She said it the way she said things she had decided were true, the way she always said things. "And I have met you now. The full version. Not the version I thought I was meeting. The actual version." He was quiet for a moment. "She was right," he said, simply, without theater, the way Abena would have said it. Akosua looked at him. For a long time, there was grief in the room. It was always in the room. It would be in the room for a long time still. But it was not the only thing in the room. There was also this. 2 people who had both loved the same person and had found, in the specific wreckage of that love, something they had not been looking for and were not yet ready to name. "I'm going home," she said. "I know," he said. I need to be there for a while. I need to be somewhere that knows my name." He nodded. "Akosua," he said. "Just that. Her name. The way you say a word when you are learning to hold it correctly." "I know," she said. He stood, looked at the apartment, at the boxes, at the desk, at the coat hook where Abena's white coat had hung for 3 months in 2 different lifetimes. Then he looked at her. "Whatever this is," he gestured between them, between the grief and the acknowledgement, and the particular impossible, complicated, specific thing that existed in the space between 2 people who had been through something that did not have a category. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him. "I know," she said, and she meant it. She came home to Accra on a Tuesday. The city received her the way it always did, loud and warm and completely indifferent to the months she had spent 7,000 miles away, becoming someone, completing something, losing and finding and carrying more weight than a person should carry alone. The taxi turned onto the familiar street. The compound wall, still that yellow, the color of old sunlight. the color of a place that had been loved for a long time. The gate. She paid the driver, picked up her bag. Her bag? Not Abena's. And walked through. The compound was quiet in the afternoon heat. The sewing machine at its table, the fabric stacked the way it was always stacked, by color, by weight, in the specific order of a woman who had always known exactly where everything was. And in the good chair, the wide one with the carved wooden armrests that only came out for weddings and funerals, and the rare occasions that required the house to show its best face to the world, Mame. She looked older. Not in the way that years make people older, in the way that grief does, faster and more specifically, in the places that show it most. Smaller than Akosua remembered. The size of a woman who had been carrying something too heavy for too long, and whose body had begun, quietly, to show the weight of it. She looked up when Akosua came through the gate. She looked at her daughter. For a long time, the way she had looked at things her whole life, with the full attention of someone who had never had the luxury of looking away from anything difficult. Akosua stood in the compound of the home she had grown up in with her bag on her shoulder, and the light coming through the compound gate the way it always came through, at that angle, at that temperature, the specific Accra afternoon light that exists nowhere else in the world, and she waited. She did not speak first. She understood without being told that this moment belonged to Mame, that whatever happened next was Mame's to begin. Mame looked at her. Then, she opened her arms. No words, no apology spoken, no explanation offered. No 7 words taken back, because words once said cannot be unsaid. Just arms. Open, in the afternoon light. In the compound that smelled like groundnut soup and fresh-cut fabric, and the specific warmth of a place that had held them both since before either of them understood what holding meant. Akosua walked across the compound and stepped into them. And for the first time, since the hospital, since the funeral, since the moment she had sat on Abena's side of the bed and breathed, she cried. Not the controlled kind. Not the kind you do alone at 2 a.m. when the work is still there in the morning and you cannot afford to be undone by it. The real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere below the place where composure lives. Below performance. Below management. Below all the years of learning to grieve in private and serve in public. From the place where a person is just a person. Just a daughter. Just a twin. Just a woman who had been carrying everything. Her sister's name, her sister's work, her sister's unfinished thing, for months, and had finally put it down. She cried properly, in her mother's arms, in the compound that smelled like home, in the city that knew her name, and Mommy held her, the way mothers hold children when holding is the only honest thing left to do. With both arms, completely, without reservation. Without words, without anything except the simple, devastating, irreplaceable fact of being there. She stayed for 2 weeks. She helped Mommy in the shop. She sat on the front step at midnight alone, the way she and Abena had sat, and let the city be loud around her. She called Jesu once, Minjun twice. She walked to the places she and Abena had walked, not to grieve, not to perform grief. Just to be in the places where her sister had existed and allow herself to know it. On the last morning before she was to leave, she did not know yet where she was going. Not Seoul? Not yet. But not only Accra, somewhere between the two. On the last morning, she sat at the kitchen table with her tea, and found on the table a letter, not from her, an envelope, with the Korean Medical Association crest in the upper left corner. She had been redirecting her mail to this address for the duration of the investigation. She had not noticed this one arrive. She opened it. It was brief. 1 page. Formal letterhead. Precise language. The specific economy of words used by institutions when they are doing something that matters, and know it. Dear Ms. Mensah, Following the conclusion of the Ethics Board review and the formal reinvestigation of the Han Soo-yeon case, the Korean Medical Association Board of Directors has voted unanimously to establish a permanent ethics oversight office within the Seoul National Forensic Medicine Institute. This office will be responsible for the ongoing review of historical case files, the independent oversight of current case documentation, and the protection of individuals who bring institutional misconduct to the board's attention. It is the unanimous decision of the board that this office be named the Abena Mensa Ethics and Truth Office. Dr. Mensa was the first African physician to be nominated for the Legacy Award. She will be the first African doctor to have her name on the door of a permanent institution within the Korean Medical Association. It is our hope that this naming honors not only what Dr. Mensa found, but what she understood. That truth, once begun, requires someone willing to finish it. We believe she found that person, with respect and recognition. The Korean Medical Association Board of Directors. Akosua read it, sat with it, read it again. Then she folded it carefully along its original crease, the way Abena would have folded it, the precise thirds, the edges aligned, the fold clean and deliberate, the way you fold something you intend to keep. She slid it back into the envelope, pressed it flat between both palms, the way she had pressed the letter in the dark in Accra on the night everything began. She looked at the table, at the morning light coming through the compound the way it always came. That specific Accra light, warm and unhurried, the color of a place that has been here a long time and will be here a long time still. And for the first time, she didn't fold herself away with it. She didn't perform composure. She didn't manage the moment. She didn't stand and move and carry it forward for someone else. She just sat, in the light, in the compound that smelled like groundnut soup and fresh-cut fabric. In the house where two girls had once sat in front of a television and decided a dream in a single silence. In the city that knew her name, Akosua, not the lesser twin, not the one who was left, not the wrong one, just herself, for the first time, in a very long time, herself. And somewhere in Seoul, in a building that was already changing its shape, a door was being fitted with a nameplate. Simple. Clean. Exact. Abena Mensa Ethics and Truth Office. The first African doctor to have her name on the door, and the woman who had put it there, was sitting in the light in Accra, alive, her own name finally fitting the shape of her life, both of them, on every door, forever.